Fraction, decimal, and percentage equivalence. All right, we're going to look at how to go between all three of these, from a fraction to a decimal to a percentage and back. Let's write 75% as a decimal and fraction in simplest form. So percentage basically just means a score out of 100. What value out of 100 do you have? So 75% is going to be 75 out of 100. Write that as 75 in the numerator, 100 in the denominator. So we want to do this in the simplest form, so we have to find out what can we divide both the numerator and the denominator by. Both of these numbers here you can divide by 25. And if we do so, 75 divided by 25 gives us 3, and 100 divided by 25 is 4. So 3 over 4 is the fraction for 75 over 100. If we're looking for the decimal, we're also looking at 75 over 100. See, 75 over 100 means 75 divided by 100. And when we divide by 100, we take the decimal value and move it to the left 2 spots. So 75 is 75.0 if we wanted, so the decimal would be right here. We're going to take this decimal and we're going to move it 2 spots to the left. So 75 divided by 100 would give us 0.75. So writing out, fix that there, writing out 75% as a decimal, it's 0.75. It's 75 100ths. Let's do the same thing with a different percentage. Let's take 32%. Okay, we're going to take 32% and write that out as a fraction and a decimal. So that's 32 over 100. And we can divide each of these by 4. We can divide 32 by 4. We can divide 100 by 4. So we can write this in its simplest form. 32 divided by 4 is 8. And 100 divided by 4 is 25. So 8 over 25 is a fraction that represents 32%. 32 is the same as 32.0 if we wanted to write it that way. When we divide that by 100, it means we move the decimal 2 spots over to the left. So 1, 2, that gives us 0.32. So 32% is also 0.32. Let's write 0.72 as a percentage and as a fraction in its simplest form. So we're going to take a decimal and write that as a percentage, take a decimal and write that as a fraction. So 0.72. We have a 7 in the tenths position and a 2 in the hundredths position. Okay, so that means that we can write this as we have 72 hundredths. This is 72 hundredths, and we can write that as 72 over 100. 72 hundredths, 72 over 100. And if we want to write that in its simplest form, we need to divide these by a common amount, and that is going to be 4. 72 divided by 4, 100 divided by 4. That gives us 18 over 25. So 0.72 can be rewritten as 18 over 25 as a fraction. Now, if we want to write this as a percentage, that is even quicker because we already said 0.72 is 72 hundredths. And 72 hundredths, well, percentage, we're talking about a score out of 100. So this is actually 72%. 0.72 is 72%. Let's do the same thing, but let's take 0.08 as our decimal number. Okay, so we want to write this as a fraction. 0.08, there's 8 in the hundredths position, so this is 8 hundredths, or 8 over 100. Both of these values we can divide by 4, so we simplify the fraction to give 2 over 25. So 0.08 is 2 over 25 when we write it as a fraction. 8 over 100 means 8 over 100. And that means the same as 8%, right? 8 over 100, that's a score of 8 out of a test of 100 points. That is 8%. All right, we have one more to do. We're going to take fractions and then write them as a decimal and as a percentage. So let's use 3/10 and write that as a decimal and percentage. So 3/10, that means the number 3, and we divide that by 10. So in this case, we're taking the decimals right here. Actually, 3.0 is 3, and we divide that by 10. So we move the decimal over one spot in this case, which gives us 0.3. Now we need to figure out what is this as a percentage. Well, we said before percentage is like your score out of 100. So we have 3/10. So how can we change this into 100ths? Well, if we multiply 10 by 10, we have 100. If we multiply the denominator by 10, we'll also have to multiply the numerator by 10, and that will give us 3 times 10 is 30 over 10 times 10, which is 100. So now we're talking about a score over 100, and the score is 30, so that is indeed 30%. Okay, let's try this with another one. Let's do 3 over 8 instead of 3 over 10. Let's say we have 3/8. That's our fraction, and we want to find out what this is as a decimal and as a percentage. So a little bit more complicated because we have to divide 3 by 8, or we need to set this up as a fraction over 100. Now, if you use a calculator actually and you just type in 3 and divide that by 8, you'll get 0.375. So you can go straight to the answer for the decimal by using a calculator. We could have also done this using long division, 3 divided by 8, and get 0.375. 0.375, we can write that out as a fraction. Okay, there's 10 spot, 100 spot, and thousands. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So this is actually 375 thousandths. But we're looking for the score out of 100. So you wouldn't normally write decimals in a fraction, but we can do that just for this explanation. We can move this to say this is the same as 37.5 over 100. That's our score out of 100. And 37.5 as our score is 37.5%. So that's how we move between fractions, decimals, and percentages.